So after lunch, while you're digesting, I want to tell you that we live in revolutionary times, which I'm sure that most of you will agree with me. Only a little bit more than 10 years ago, Facebook came up, and we already have more than 1 billion Facebook pages. And the first iPhone came out less than a decade ago, and we already have more than 4.5 billion people walking with small computers that once brought us to the moon. Okay, so something's really big is happening. And of course, it's impacting our attentional resources, our relationships, our biological rhythms, and even for some people are beginning to feel that it's also impacting our stress levels. But there's other revolutions that are actually happening, and I don't know if you're aware, and I'm going to tell you about it now. So the first very interesting revolution that's happening right now is what I call the brain revolution. So at 1990, George Bush, the father, declared a very big and important project that's called the Decade of the Brain, which meant a lot of resources and money going into neuroscience, which at that time was a very small field. And although the decade ended, the momentum went into the beginning of the 21st century. And only in the last few years, there's 3 big, huge projects with a lot of money invested in trying to understand more of our brain. The Human Connectome Project, with an ambitious goal to understand all the connections in the human brain. The Brain Initiative by Obama to understand, to be able to detect all the neurons in the human brain, and the EU Human Brain Project with the ambition to simulate the brain with supercomputers. And all of this is billions of dollars going into brain research. And a lot of things are still happening, and there's a lot of way to go. But there are a few big understandings that are already emerging, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about a few of them. The first very, very big and important one is the understanding that our brains are plastic. And this means that our brains are changing constantly in response to training or to experience. And the connections between our neurons are constantly changing. But also, we today understand that most of the time, our brain is changing unwittingly. Not only our brain is changing, now we understand that our genome is changing. The whole field of genetics is understanding today that although all of us have the same genome set, we actually, our genes have like small buttons and levels, and the extent in which genes are turned on and off is highly dynamic and highly impacted by experience. Just for an example, animal studies show that the relationship between a mother and her offspring can greatly impact the expression of genes in the offspring's brain, and this can be impacting all his life. So we understand today that our brains and our genes are not fixed, and they're dynamic and plastic, but most of the time, we don't really control what is changing and shaping us, and we should realize this. Another theme that is emerging from the brain science is that there's a bidirectional pathway, highway between our brains and the bodies. Not only is our brain regulating systemic biological systems, but actually alterations in our body can feed back and impact our brains and behaviors. Just recently, we started to understand that the germs in our gut can impact our mood and psychiatric condition. And the fourth theme I want to tell you about, which I think is a little bit relevant, is something that I found very exciting, is that we start understanding that we all have a biological predisposition for generosity, kindness, and compassion. Just like language, we have a predisposition for language, but we need a specific environment for language to develop. We have in our brains a predisposition for compassion and goodness, but we need an environment for that to be cultivated. the emerging understandings coming from neuroscience and the tools and methods that have been developed around these themes has given ground to the third and last revolution I want to talk about, and this is the mind revolution. Around 1983, a few neuroscientists decided they want to take the challenge of understanding not only how our brain works, but what is the mind. This is a very big challenge. This is maybe the challenge of humanity. And like experts, like professionals, they decided to go and talk to who is supposed to be experts in the field of the mind. And they met with the Dalai Lama, which represents a very big group of people that in the essence of their daily work, they believe that happiness, to be happy, you need to understand your mind in a very deep way. So they have all kinds of ways to try to investigate their own mind. So they went and met with him. And a few years later, a big institute, scientific institute, the Mind and Life Institute, was created. But only 20 years later, in 2003, the first public meeting between scientists and people that have this mind practices, like the Dalai Lama, met at MIT University. But since 2003, we're now in 2014, we have more than 3,000 publications, scientific publications, high-quality journals, investigating what happens when you cultivate awareness and attention. More than 120 NIH-funded projects, more than 30 public dialogues between leading Nobel Prize researchers and people that are very good in practicing their mind. And just to tell you a small tip, in 2017, we here in IDC are going to host the Mind and Life Institute, Mind and Life Dialogue about conflict and how the mind can be transformed in conflict, with the Dalai Lama as the keynote speaker. So like you see, there's parallel revolutions, right? There's a lot of science happening around it in parallel to the digital revolution. So all this science that's happening around it is already giving us a lot of information about what happens when people actually proactively cultivate their awareness, their attention, their emotion regulation abilities, their self-regulation abilities, and also all kinds of emotions like compassion and empathy. So there's a lot of training, mind training. Mindfulness, if you heard about it, is one of the ones that was most researched. But it's all about proactively, in a very, very systematic way, cultivating these abilities. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to do some kind of a practice with you, but you're welcome to stay tuned to what we're doing here at the IDC and come to visit some of our workshops. So we understand today that a lot of changes in the brain are happening when people are actually doing this training, even after a few weeks. And all of these are impacting attention control, emotion regulation, self-awareness. These are changes that are anatomical, meta-awareness, body awareness, self-emotion regulation, etc. So it looks like we can really take advantage of the neuroplasticity and intentionally shape our brains and bodies, not only in a way that is uncontrolled, but we can control this shaping. And we're doing it by harnessing attention and awareness. And since we have this bidirectional connection between our brain and mind, we have a lot of research today showing that by cultivating your mind, you actually can impact your body, you can impact your immune system. You can impact even the expressions of the genes and the way the chromosomes work, etc. Okay, these are really recent works, all published in very high impact journals. So cultivating the mind changes the brain. Changing the brain impacts our body and can impact our physical health. And the other way goes also by changing our bodies, by altering our bodies in a controlled way through all kinds of body-oriented therapies. We can feed back to our brain and influence our brain in beneficial ways. But I think the most important message of all this revolution that's happening around us is that we're actually not, most of us are actually not fulfilling our full potential of the human mind. And when I mean most of us, I also mean very high intellectual people, very successful people, very creative people, very, also me, okay? We don't even, most of us don't even realize how much more of our mind we can cultivate and how much more we can make use of our mind abilities. And most of us are actually walking around the world in a very reactive rather than a proactive way. Okay, and if you don't believe me, just check how many times in a day you react to your iPhone, okay? And what happens when you decide you don't want to react to your iPhone, how hard it is. But the thing is that if we want to live in this very high-speed world that we're entering in because of the digital revolution, it seems we don't have a choice. We have to be able to notice online, okay, what's happening. To notice online what is our emotions and what are the thoughts that are moving me at the moment and underlying my decisions. And to be able to notice a lot of information that is going around. We have to be able to manage our attention, awareness, and emotional resources in a way that perhaps never before we needed to do. So I think the message coming from these revolutions that are happening in parallel is that we must develop the potential of our mind to be able to live in well-being and to do good and to be good people also. In the digital age, we have to proactively cultivate our awareness and attention resources in order to be able to notice what are we feeling and what are we thinking and what are the thoughts and feelings we want to manage our life and not to be reactive to the things that are happening. We need to be able to proactively cultivate our relationships and our positive emotions and our empathy and our compassion, because this is something that if it's not cultivated, even if we have the potential, then it just deteriorates. And this means that we have to start in our schools and with our children, and instead of just thinking about how if we really want to get our children ready to live in this digital world, we first of all need to be able to give them the abilities to cultivate these mind skills as the basics. And even here, when we go to higher education and we think about our students and how we can help them become very successful people, we also have to think how we cultivate in all these programs these skills in order to be able to function optimally and be good people with good relationships and well-being and healthy in the digital age. And I want to end with a quote by Howard Reynolds that wrote one of the first books about living in an online life. And he said, rule number 1 is to pay attention. Rule number 2 might be, attention is a limited resource, so pay attention to where you pay attention. Thank you very much.